Oi oi, it's big weekend racing this weekend. Basically the Friday, Saturday's the creme de la creme. It's Wetherby and Down Royal. So we're the end of October, beginning of November. This is when racing really starts to ramp up. Before we know it, every weekend within November through to beginning of the next year, we'll have top grade action. We're going to get some questions answered. We're going to get some questions raised about this weekend. But more importantly, with 48-hour declarations, Tuesday night has never been a better time to look at it. Now, typically this is the time to look at it anyway. Irish entries for the weekend will be out around about 1 o'clock-ish on the Tuesday. But now with this 48-hour declaration window, we know today the horses that will be declared to run Thursday. Gives us a bit of an insight to those that have been entered that might still hold entries at the weekend. So if they're pulled out and they still run. But basically it gives us a real free rein to look at Friday, Saturday and Sunday. Mainly it'll be Friday, Saturday in this episode, to give us a steer and maybe a bit of an advantage of the sort of races we're looking at, sort of horses that are interesting me and the sort of price points I might be thinking about this far out. Now, of course, final declaration stage will be where you really want to be talking about your price point because you know the level of competition. But I'm just going to give you guys a bit of a feel about how I do things this season. November's the start of it ramping up, so this weekend is typical of maybe a big chance to start looking at things in a bit more depth. As the weekends go on, I would suggest that things would improve, not just in terms of content or my selection ratio. I just think they'll improve because there'll be a bit more substance behind it. And if you've watched this first video, you'll understand a bit more about some of the things I might be talking about, methods and things like that. But without further ado, I'm going to show my screen recordings of what I'm looking at. That'll be sped up slightly in the bits where there's not a lot going on. And then as soon as I've got something of note to say, I will slow it down. We'll talk about that. I'll try and keep this as condensed as I can. This is a foresight for the weekend coming up. So nothing's concrete. So here we go. So we're going to kick ourselves straight off into Friday's action. Now, typically when I look at the jumps meetings that are in here, I'll know the races or the meetings that I'll be keen to look at, sort of with a priority. Uttoxeter would be down the bottom of the list. So what we'll do is quickly skim through the entries at Uttoxeter. And basically, the initial point that I'm looking at for these sort of ones, we're not at final declarations. I'm looking for some names of horses that were going to interest me. Now, obviously, I know people have trackers, all those bits and pieces, but it's just nice to see the entries as they're listed, potentially seeing the terms that they're in there, getting a bit of a vibe of horses that might be running at the weekend, or even new names that you're not so sure of, or even just seeing horses that might be entered up in multiple locations without having to look at every horse and every list of entries they've got. So first race we've got here, just a Novices hurdle at Uttoxeter. There's a few interesting enough names in there. Linley King's quite a nice horse. Disappointed slightly in bumpers before. Everglow we've seen's already run at Chepstow this week. Fulgurix, a near horse for Colin Tizard. Don't see too many of them. Grand Mogul, I think that has gone and won at Chepstow today. Yeah, so I mean, there's interesting names there. Big Sting, I liked him from Harry Fries. He was a very big horse. Chasing would be his game, so wouldn't fancy too much for this season. But yeah, there could be some interesting ones at Uttoxeter. Looking at those early entries, it's nothing that I'd be caring about until we saw final declarations. That isn't to dismiss those completely, but looking from this far out, we really want to be whittling it down to the big, real interesting races. Basically make better use of the time this far out. And of course, with 48-hour declarations now, we can, get stuck into final decks a lot sooner than we previously could, which gives us a bigger advantage in terms of pricing up races to beat the markets. In case, normally when the 24-hour decks, you might not get through all the cards in time before they've been priced up. So not a great deal at Uttoxeter, which I wouldn't have expected. Beginner's Chase is a bit more interesting now. This Coconut Splash was a horse put up he came second, didn't he, at Aintree. Big price, fell after when he ran at Newbury, then went and lost his novice status after that. But he's a nice, real big chasing type. We've got King Roland in there as well. There's a few there for the ruckers we can see. So the blue and pink stripe, Coconut Splash, Bold Plan, Goyden Earth. Gumball's in there. Yeah, it looks like a fair race. So that would be one that would be more interesting, that Beginner's Chase, 310. Now, I'd have that penciled in as a race to look at, but again, it would be final declarations because I want to see where sort of who lines up, but that would be a race that I'd be looking at with a bit of interest. Mare's Handicapped Chase, couldn't think of a worse proposition for me. And that's it. So we've gone through what I'd class as the weakest of the three meetings for Friday. I know which is the best in my eyes. It's going to be Down Royal, so we're going to squeeze to Wetherby beforehand. Now, what's interesting with the two-day meet at Wetherby is that the Irish trainers will sometimes send some horses over. There's a nice hurdle race for juveniles, and there's obviously a nice big hurdle race for the big kids as well. We've seen big names in the past come over to run in this. A novices handicap hurdle to begin with. Again, in terms of pecking order, now I can come across as quite a snob for this, and I am a snob for it. These sort of 110 and sub-rated horses, they're not going to be interesting me in the slightest. I don't want to necessarily waste my time on looking at those ones. The Novices Chase will be interesting, even just seeing Chamblou at the top there. Obviously won really well and was very impressive. Dan Skelton horses tend to be quite impressive on chase and debut, so whether it means they're more advanced in their first couple of runs or not, maybe it's different to say. But Hold the Note will be another interesting one. Obviously still got his novice in status, was a lot of people's pick for the festival races last year. So yeah, that's going to look like an interesting race to come back to. But even just looking at it now in terms of depth, I'm not sure I'd be too keen on thinking there'll be some value in that. Handicap hurdle, again, wouldn't look the greatest. Although from a ratings perspective, it is a tiny bit better. But yeah, it wouldn't look the greatest to me on that. Listed Handicapped Chase, so potentially there could be some nice types in here. My first and foremost races to look at would not be the handicaps. I prefer looking at sort of open races where there might be certain types of conditions in there. But yeah, this could be a race where there's going to be, it will be a second glance. I'd probably look at this when it comes to final decks. It might sound a bit strange, but I would potentially look at prioritising the races that I'll look at for a weekend, and I'd suggest the same for other people as well. Now, if you've got the luxury of having all day, every day, all night to be able to go through horse racing, watching replays, etc., then of course get stuck into as many races as possible, because you're probably going to find more opportunities to find a bet. But if you've got a niche or a particular medium that you like betting in, like I say with me, I like the novice races, or I like the open races, the graded races, bits and pieces like that. Snobby, but I prefer the better class of races. You don't necessarily have to just look at everything. Now, you can have it depends how much time you want to put into it, essentially, but don't need to be going over and beyond with stuff. You don't necessarily have to be looking at every single race. Now, you could potentially be missing a winning betting opportunity. You may not be. You just need to give yourself enough of a feel for the weekend of, like, these might be 10 races on my shortlist or whatever it is. That's the point of doing this first part, to give ourselves a shortlist to know which races to look at. So this is a steady looking handicap at this particular stage, but I wouldn't be getting drawn into it as yet. It might be one that makes the list to get looked at. So this is the listed juvenile hurdle I was talking about. Now, Gordon Elliott, after Longclaw won, said that he was talking about bringing the horse over for this race. Looks okay on paper. I wouldn't be getting too excited about it, to be honest. So again, we'll have to look for final declarations, but this would definitely be a race that I'll look at, because it does depend what final declarations are, but there could be a couple of interest in there. I suppose the point of doing it now would be suggesting the ones that I would think were a couple of interest. So basically, you can see on jockey bookings there's a few that could run in here, potentially on ratings as well. A 1-2-8 horse down here, Iconic, beaten last time out, admittedly, was beaten favourite, but getting the sex allowance, puts it like a 135-ish horse. Soldier on Parade, the top weight that has got another jockey booking, carries a winner's penalty for the conditions of a race that it's won. Actually, will be giving this Iconic a bit more weight, so it makes this horse very interesting just on a numbers perspective, without going into any depth of the form. Obviously, the Gordon Elliott entrant, Longclaw, was interesting given the comments he made last time. Dufflecoat, another one of Gordon Elliott's. There's potential for some other horses to come about here. Skeltons are in rude form at the moment, so it would be a race that's only 10 runners. I'd be happy to look through them. I would probably wait for final declarations for that, but I know that's a race I'm definitely going to want to come back to. And then this Handicap Chase. Study Doc AA will always be a horse that I want to give a second look back to, because I can't believe how low its mark's getting down. Now, this will be the first one that I'll peel up, and this is maybe for my own sanity than anything else, but only really a babby. Came over from France, was given its opening mark based on its French form, which was 136. So we're already down £11 from that. Hasn't really shown a great deal of winning presence in it, apart from the time that it ran at Newbury when I did fancy it. Third time in for a handicap, it just bumped into Fanny and D'Estruval. We'll remember that horse that it went on to be, I think it was favourite at Kempton for Christmas for a graded chase. So it just bumped into one that day. So I still think that there'll be a winning day for this horse. Anthony Honeyball's in good form at the moment. So yeah, I'd have him on a short list to go back to. Again, I wouldn't be worried until it came to final declarations.
Also there, where I've had an initial thought on a horse, I'll just have a quick skim through the names of the horses that are in there just to give myself a feel of, am I really particularly worried about anything in terms of horses that I follow or horses that I fancied a bit more. And with respect to all the entries that are in here, nothing else really jumps out to me as a potential plot or something that I think could be a lot better than its mark. So yeah, Study Doc AA would be interesting at Wetherby for the Friday. And we've got a nice novice hurdle here as well. So 2 mile novices hurdle, third time lucky, decent bumper form, obviously fourth in the champion bumpers, gone out and won nicely. People are touting it for a Supreme. You'd be struggling to get me back in a Skelton horse for the Supreme, but that's fairly sort of generic comment from me, to be honest. Not in terms of slagging the Skeltons, it's just a generic comment in the fact that it's this far out. I like to, I don't know, it wouldn't be on my sort of radar as a Supreme winner yet, but he does look a very nice horse, and of course it'll be an interesting one to watch. Champagne Super Over, again, it flopped at Newbury in a bumper, but it'll be interesting whenever that runs. Was supposed to run at Cheltenham, wasn't it? And then it was withdrawn. And then there's a couple of other ones in there for Roddy Murphy as well. So it depends what they run, but potentially looking at that, there's probably 2 or 3, and not many more that I'll be interested in. And given the fact that that's the numbers we're talking about, then we're probably not going to be looking at great betting opportunities if we've only got 2 or 3 we think are going to be of any ability. Over to Ireland for the Down Royal. Now this is going to be exciting because there's some big names that we're just waiting to see come out. Obviously big news coming out as well that Jack Kennedy broke his collarbone. I think it's 18 days he's had since the injury. He'll be riding out on Thursday. That's big news and big boost for Gordon Elliott, Gigginstown for the weekend ahead. We'll have to see about his fitness because I know before he's had lots of injuries, Jack Kennedy, and sometimes when he comes back after a little bit of a break, he might not be as fully wound up. I would suggest a broken collarbone to get your fitness. I mean, not that he would have lost a lot in those couple of weeks necessarily, but from an injury perspective, yeah, I mean, it's a positive to have him back. That's all I can really say at the moment. But we've got a nice maiden hurdle to start with, 2 mile 6. So I like staying novices, and I've mentioned this numerous times now. Over in Ireland, I think there's a really good sort of programme for it. There's some nice listed races at longer distances, and I do think we tend to get some really nice entries. We'll see some big names maybe in this particular race, but we'll get some nice entries in these stay-in novice hurdles, and mainly that's because there's just such an abundance of talent over there, or exciting ones for the season. You see Gigginstown all the time at this time of year will have an abundance of entries, so it will just be more a case of final declarations to see what's going on in there. But for Route de Lan, unbeaten so far, including a win in points. Wide receiver will definitely have come on from that last run. Holy Macapony won its point thing for Barry Maloney. That point form looks okay. I wouldn't say it's much more than that, but it's an interesting entrant anyway, and I think that might be entered elsewhere as well. But anyway, that looks a potentially interesting one. We've got a grade 3 on the Friday in Ireland. It's a mare's novice hurdle, so again, not to be like too snobbish about them, but it's not one that I'll be too confident in suggesting I'd fancy something, or when I come to price this to pick out value, I might not be as keen on anything in here, but it's a really nice looking race. Anna Bonina was obviously ran at Cheltenham last week and was well fancy for that. I thought its rating was a bit of a joke, to be honest. How they brought it over to England and they hiked it up such a way. It had that second run in a handicap. I think it might have been at Galway, but I didn't think its mark was true of its actual ability. So maybe running in this race would have been better. Whether it will run 7 days or 6 days in between, I don't know. Brave Way for Henry de Bromhead. Kenneth Alexander loves the mare's programme. That won nicely a couple of weeks back, so that'll be interesting. Queensbrook's obviously the main one. That's Gordon Elliott's tout for the mare's novice hurdle for himself, and obviously was fairly close in the champion bumper as well. So decent enough looking race. Hopefully we get a few entries. Price point would be pivotal in there, and I struggle a bit with the mares to get too excited. So my price point tends to be harsh in terms of the fact that I'm being greedy. The Wicked Hurdle. So this is a big race in the mark of the season, mainly for the fact of Abacadabras. Now you can see from the entries within there, Jason the Militant finally won a race. I think a lot of people are suggesting that he's maybe a bit of a dark horse to watch this season. I don't know. He'd have had to take a big step forward after his win at the back end of last season. For me, I know there was another win before that, but anywho, he'll be an interesting entrant that's in here. Aspire Tower would obviously be interesting in here as well. Six Shooter, the horse that we know that I love, another one that would be interesting, but you can forget the bottom three in there. So there's four potentially interesting runners in the Wicked Hurdle. Abacadabra will definitely be coming here from what we've been told. Six Shooter I really, really like, and I'd love to see him back at 2 Mile-ish. I do think that this horse needs to go over fences at some point. I do think the horse would appreciate a bit further as well. He's only 5 though. I like him being tested. Probably wouldn't be good enough for this, but he is going to get £8 from Abacadabras. I wonder whether Gigginstown will run the pair. Henry de Bromhead, I wouldn't be surprised if I saw him run both of those, but they are making seasonal reappearances like Abacadabras is. You just got to think Abacadabras is going to be short, and deservedly so, really. The 245 a handicap hurdle. Now, again, snobbishy wise, you can see this is an 80 to 102. Top one is 106. There are conditions where they can get slightly over, but this wouldn't interest me in the slightest. Especially when we consider the beginner's chase after over 2 mile 3.5, well, the best part of 2 mile 4. Easy Work, Envoy Elan, even January Jets in there is an interesting entrant. I think the key thing to remember here is that Easy Work, Envoy Elan, first and second in the Ballymore, they're obviously not going to come up against each other in this. It would be balmy for Gordon Elliott to do it. Envoy Elan will come here. Envoy Elan, given the fact that we'll be chopping Easy Work out of this, it doesn't seem to have a whole lot to be going up against. So not going to be a betting proposition. It's just going to be a learning curve. It doesn't look like he's going to have any problems winning that unless his jumping's a bit suspect, but we've seen his points and that's good, so nothing to worry about there. And then I'm going to miss another handicap, not too fussed on that. And then we're going to look quickly at the bumper. Again, names and entries to see in here if there's anyone that we really, really like. And Sigerhard or Gerard, big name, lots of people are touting him for a champion bumper. Would be the main name there. I've got a feeling he's entered up a couple of times, maybe even up to Sunday. But just have a quick look at that. But yeah, that, again, it's another one that I'd look more into at final declarations. There's lots of bumper horses that I do like, lots of bumper horses that are on my radar. But yeah, we see they're entered up twice. It just depends where they go. But it's important to look now and see where these horses are doubly entered. We will squeeze onto Sunday's card for Cork just for the sake of it. But to see where they're doubly entered, to see why they might have avoided certain races. So, for example, you see the entries in here, and we can see Gerard is in here. Anyone that's entered in both those bumpers isn't going to know exactly where this one's going to go unless they get any word from the yard. Ordinarily, when it's 24-hour decks, you might see horses avoiding each other. So, something that might not be as crucial to look at nowadays as it was before, but it's still something that I take into account. So, Friday, we've had a quick skim through there. When I do this second recording, which will be the follow-up to this, it'll be much more about looking at the races, talking about a bit more form and giving you the reason why I come to my price point. So this one, I'm trying to get done as sort of quick as I can without rushing myself through it. But basically, the next one, there'll be a bit more skimming of the screens, me going through bits, and then I'll just be talking specifically about the races themselves. This particular one here is just telling you where I'm whittling down in terms of the races. So Weatherby, Downroll, Ascot, look, monster meetings. Again, I normally say that I'll look at the meeting that I doesn't really jump out to interest me, just so I don't miss anything, especially in terms of entries, because again, if we see horses that have got a big entry at a big meeting and then they've got a weaker entry at the weaker meetings, maybe it's a telling sign where they go as to how far forward they might just be. Maiden Hurdle up here at Ayr. Again, the northern scene doesn't really get me too excited, to be honest. Depends when they have big race days, who the big yards will send up in accompaniment for those big targets, but there's nothing really jumping out. Voideur, that used to be with Harry Fry, isn't it? Yeah, lots of handicaps, so wouldn't particularly be my forte, but I'm sure there'll be lots of you that, maybe even people that follow JP Angles, all those bits and pieces, there'll be a few people that would be interested in final declarations for these sort of meetings, and I'm sure people do quite well out of it. Scottish Champion Hurdle Trial, which is still a handicap hurdle. Sebastopol, still don't think that's achieved the heights that was maybe expected of it. I think Tom Lacey's horses will have a better run this season, so he'd be marginally interesting. Again, it would depend on final declarations, but given it's a handicap, you might end up getting a bit of a price about him. So Sebastopol would be semi-interesting in that race. So again, final declarations, I would be looking at that race probably just to see who's in there and what sort of price we might be able to get. And yeah, not too much in the bumper for now in terms of names jumping off the team sheet, but one I'll probably come back to because I'm looking at Air for the sake of it anyway. So we've got a handful of races so far for we're looking at Friday, now we're on to Saturday across the 2 days. Voider that I mentioned there at Air has this other entry at Wetherby. So again, it makes you wonder whether... I'm not saying they're plotting anything with these horses, but in terms of the depth of race at the entry stage compared to declaration stage, you might be able to make a decision yourself where might be the easier option, and can sometimes give a bit of confidence to what they're trying to do. What I mean by that is if they're running them in the harder of the two options, you would likely think they're not trying to win, just because the harder race you run, and if you're not trying, you're more likely to get beat and well beat. Not really a hard and fast rule, but something I like to just keep an eye on anyway. Novices hurdle, we saw Global Flame was entered in another race. I think that was on the Friday. That might have been up at Utoxeter. So again, a number of entries. Fulgarix was exactly the same. They're entered in similar types of races here in terms of not the greatest, but yeah, you'd be interested to see where those do get finally declared, although then neither of those that have been mentioned would be interested in me in terms of a bet. Handicapped Chase, again, not really the sort of thing that I would be looking for. Now, Novices Handicapped Chase this time of the season are more interesting because we'll have an official rating for those horses, but they're allowed to get in off of their hurdle ratings, essentially. So you can get some horses that are bound to be better chasers that get in quite light. So they're worth having a look at anyway, just to see for improvement. And then when you see something that goes and wins well, the race as a whole could look quite interesting. The Bet365 Mares listed hurdle, this will be very interesting. Now, we've already got a book priced up in here. More interesting in the fact that Stormy Island, I talked about her last season quite a lot when I did previews with Daryl. She's a proper grade 3 mare now. She's only 6 now, going 7. There is still scope for her to improve and turn into a little bit better. This is only a listed race, so shy of the grade 3, but it's not far off. This is her sort of bag. This is her sort of race to be doing well in, and you'd think that this is the race that they'll be running her in. Verdana Blues in here for Nikki Henderson. Probably slightly disappointing in the fact that she got beat at Kempton, but we know that Silver Street won it well there last year. It's like price-wise, you can see it's a bit of a match between the two of them. I would be wanting, given the fact that they are both so skinny, I think they'll both run. You'd want to be waiting for final decks and ground and all those sort of things to take things into consideration. But could very much be an interesting race between the pair. I wouldn't be getting excited about it, but obviously I feel like I'll come back to that. Bet365 hurdle, Grade 2, West Yorkshire hurdle. Now, this is going to be an absolute corker race. Again, it's been priced up. What I think is really interesting here is Slatehouse is in this and he's in the Charlie Hall. Now, Slatehouse over fences, and especially over staying trips, was a bit it sort of got me a bit stuck with, is he really staying those trips? Then he ran so well in the Feltham. I thought, oh, maybe he's not too bad. And obviously the fact that he missed a season and that was his proper first season back, maybe he's going to come on from it, all those bits and pieces. But an entry like this into this race, we've seen Colin Tizard do this with other horses, like I think Native Rivers come here before, going on to win at the Hennessy. It's just a bit of a feeder race for horses to go over hurdles. So you'd suggest with the final declaration, if Slatehouse was coming in, it would be more of a fitness thing. And Colin Tizard's form, I mean, they're starting to come out into a bit of better form now, but his horses haven't particularly been running that great. But yeah, it'd be a really interesting race. Lisnagar Oscar obviously is going out to prove that it wasn't a fluke winning the Stayers hurdle. Time Hill stepping out on his Stayers hurdle campaign as well. Copperhead, now that's the one where I said about the Hennessy prep for Native River. That's more likely what's going to be happening here for Copperhead, I think. I mean, you could expect him to still run quite well, though, to be fair. And then there's other bits and pieces of horses in here that will be interesting. So next destination for Paul Nicholls, the ex-Willie Mullins, will be very interesting. Long layoff, you can see they're 920 days. So the fact that that horse is priced at 4-1, given the length of layoff, worries me. I mean, I wouldn't be able to touch that at that price. Not saying he wouldn't be able to win, but that's horrendous. Portrush Ted's a horse I've mentioned last season, a horse to follow. He did come and win, and then he fell after. He fell in a Pertemps qualifier as well, and he would have qualified. That was a bit fuming for me, so I suspect that would be a season-long thought process again. So maybe chuck him in here to test his depth and then see about a Pertemps qualification. I don't know. But yeah, Portrush Ted would be an interesting one. I feel like that second run when he fell, he wasn't really that close enough. Maybe they were trying to get him qualified. I don't know. I feel like he would have run after Cheltenham. He would have run somewhere else. So how they're planning things with him, I don't know. But he would be interesting from a season perspective. Holstone's a nice enough horse in there as well. Even Indefatigable, she's going to get her mare's allowance. Obviously went and won at the festival. She's quite ground dependent, although she's better on slower ground than I gave her credit for in her younger years. And then Roxana obviously won the mare's hurdle a couple of years back. So that looks a steady enough race. The price is already in there. Again, I don't know if I could be getting stuck in. I'd be tempted to wait for final declarations, but I'll be looking at this as a race to keep an eye on the horses in between to see what they're going to be doing after. Like I say, the likes of Copperhead for a Labyrinth trophy, things like that. So it looks like it's a good race. I couldn't really be looking at it at the moment and thinking about a bet. Now, the Charlie Hall Chase. This is one, especially this far out, I am thinking about a bit of a potential line in for a bet in this, and mainly because Surname's named to come here. Now, we know he was going to go to Down Royal for the Champion Chase. That hasn't happened because of restrictions on staff travelling and all that sort of stuff, so that's understandable. But he's entered in the Gold Cup at Ascot as well. Now, we know Surname's highest rating and everything that he's achieved has come via running at Ascot. Charlie Hall's left-handed, not right-handed. Ground might be slower at Ascot as well. It might be about the same, but I just feel like Surname might not even come here because although this race will cut up from the 20 entries, he might be better staying to Ascot. But I mean, we'll have to see. But he was 5-4 not so long ago. Trying to find a bit of value against him. Really, last year's winner, Ballyoptic, £6 extra than he was last year. Has to go on the short list a bit, but skinny enough now maybe. Vindication, Kim Bailey's confirmed he's going to come here and not go to Ascot, the race that he won last year. So, again, you give him a chance, especially on these terms. Weatherby's a tough old track to jump around, but Vindication jumps lovely. Earlier today, you could get 6-1 each of these. I think you could even get 7-1 Vindication. So it was a sort of angle where I was thinking you could play the pair against something like Surname. Definitely Red's a bit old. Yeah. Sam Spinner could obviously go well here, and he has been the subject of support, but it's going to be hard to go from novice into something like this type of race. And yeah, he would definitely look way too short for me. Slatehouse, as I've already touched on, he might go for the hurdle race. I'd still like to see him come here over fences, to be honest, but we'll just have to see. Yeah, Labago War, she was sent a 5-2 favourite for this race last year, and given the fact that she's been so long since she's won, she actually gets in here with no winner's penalty at all. So she's actually, £9 now better off with Ballyoptic that beat her last year. I mean, she was pulled up. She would need good ground, so whether they risk her or not on slower ground, I don't know. But there's going to be plenty of rain about. I think it'll be soft all over. It looks an interesting race. I'd be wanting to take on Surname all day long. I'm not sure we're going to get enough value against it. But yeah, Vindication and Ballyoptic would be my two against the pair right now. And then we've got another handicap hurdle there. So that's pretty much Weatherby Saturday covered. So there's a few bits of interest in there. Of course there would be, giving you my early initial thoughts on it. Sometimes I'll get excited about a race where there might be a chance to get stuck in for a bet. Hopefully we might see some of that at Down Royal now. So we've got the 3-year-old hurdle. Quilixilos, or however we say it, for Gordon Elliott, made a really big impression on Davy, didn't it? Duffel Coat we touched on is entered over at Weatherby as well. So we'll go one of the two. It makes you realise that the other Gordon Elliott horse I mentioned, I can't remember the name now, the one that's also entered at Weatherby suggests that that's the one that's going to go and run there. Quilixilos will be short. Hopefully he runs. Wouldn't be interested in that. Maiden Hurdle, you can see from the top name, Ballyadam there, this is going to be a really interesting one. Now, this is a 2 mile, basically 2 mile, half a furlong. Ballyadam's in there, Bob Ollinger's in there. Both of those are short-ish for the sort of Ballymore-ish markets. Clondall Bertie was very well supported for Mouse Morris on debut, and I haven't been as disappointed with a horse in a long time now. I know Mouse horses need the run and they'll come on for it, but his point form looked good. He'll be one to keep an eye on, though, given the fact that they do come on for the run. So that looks an interesting enough race if those two were to go up against each other. Whether they will or not, I don't know, but you'd think Gordon's going to be sending his horses out there because it's a meeting that he likes to target. Wide receiver, again, we mentioned about that. That was in the 2 mile 6 race, and he's got an entry here for 2 mile and half a furlong, so go figure about what they're doing with him. Another handicap hurdle. Now, some of these Irish handicap hurdles will be more interesting than others. This could be interesting. I definitely need to leave it till the end. Just skimming through the ones why I'm saying it's a bit interesting is Lignu for Noel Mead. Noel Mead's in flying form. That horse is better than 120. The Very Man, maybe 135 is about-ish in terms of handicap. I think they need about £7 up their sleeve, but I do think the Very Man could be a 140-ish horse, so he'd be slightly interesting. Hannon's a horse that's won recently. I do. It's sort of been like an on-the-radar horse for a while. He's only 5. So potential improvement from that. Getaway Gorgeous in there as well for Willie Mullins. Well regarded. 130 could look shy for that as well. So be interested to see the final entries for that. The Labyrinth Champion Chase, the one we were talking about where Surname was supposedly going to be coming, but obviously that hasn't quite worked out. Now, this will be pivotal to see what happens with Jack Kennedy coming back. First thing I'll mention on that is if we peel up Delta Work, when he ran last year at this meeting, well beaten by Road to Respect, and there was a lot of talk there about the fact that that was his first race out in open company after a novice, but there's lots of talk about the fact that Keith Donahue didn't maybe give him the greatest of rides. It may be the case that his best performances don't come after a break. We could see there that he only just won as a short price favourite. We could see there that he was beat. We can see there after a bit of a break at Cheltenham. Now that's an RSA, let's not belittle that, but maybe he needs the run. But with Jack Kennedy back on board, won both those times with him last season, that's got to be a positive, and he is 170 rated. And on these terms, given the fact that it's a grade 1, you'd be hard-pressed to think that he's going to get beat. There's a grade 2 Steeplechase which comes after. So this is kind of like... It's a certain conditions racing, but basically we get lots of the novices from last season that will end up running in here. It isn't exclusively... limited to the Giggins Towney horses, but you can see they've got 3 entries that are in here, and Sam Crow will definitely run. Don't think Battle Over Doyne will come in here as well. Notebook would be the most interesting one because it would be a step up in trip, so I'd quite like to see Notebook come here against Sam Crow. Whether they do it or not, I don't know. Easy game for Willie Mullins. The last couple of chase wins for that were very impressive. Sizing Potsy hasn't been able to complete in a couple of his starts quite recently, but Chasing is making the most of him. So this will be a really interesting one. It'll be. I will look at this one, and it'll be difficult to price it up, I suspect, because I'm not going to give Sam Crow the respect he probably deserves, just for the fact that he was a bit inconsistent last season, wasn't he? I do think he probably would have put it to the JP horse Fakir Doudry when he fell, but of course we won't know. So yeah, he'll be fav, won't he? We'll just have to see what sort of price I'd pitch him at. Obviously, it's an interesting race to look at. There's no need to say that twice. Flat race, the bumpers. This is for the Saturday. I was just looking at a couple of the names. I wonder whether it was a certain conditions race, but it's not. Yeah, so Gerard's in there again. Nothing else particularly would jump off the list. The other Gordon Elliott runner here, Corran Cross. We saw this run earlier this month. I'm just trying to remember the race myself now, to be honest. I probably want to watch that one back because I can't particularly remember the race, but I do remember the name of the horse. Maybe he could be interesting. And again, given the fact that the race doesn't particularly look too deep away from Gerard, maybe that will go the Friday and that could come here. Gordon Elliott could win both those races. But that's down raw for the Saturday squeeze through. We looked at Wetherby. We'll squeeze on to Ascot now. So look, basically, you can see already, just a couple of days that we've gone through, there's quite a lot that can be drawing people in. Sometimes these races, when they're this far out, I can get a bit more of a guise of the price I might want on them, but it does typically, you need to wait till final declaration stage so you know what you're up against. These are the sort of races I was talking about here, where we've got the Novices Handicap Chase. So there will be some horses that have won over fences or have already run over fences. You will get other horses that are making their chase debuts in these types of races, and they're the ones that are possibly quite a lot more interesting to me. So Solidoc AA, I mentioned about that before. It was in a very weak race elsewhere. It's ended up here at Ascot. I've got a feeling they ran it at Ascot before they ran it in Newbury. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's another JP one. No, they did. So they ran it in this exact race, the Novices Handicap Chase. So this is a second season novice. And I'll be honest with you, he was very quietly ridden. If you watch that race back, he could have got a lot closer than he did, which is what part of my angle going into Newbury. Maybe they'll think about trying it again, and maybe they'll think about trying this time round, but we'll just see where they finally declare him. It Sure Is was one of my sort of ones to follow list, but not specifically a horse to follow. It was talk about second season novices. Chasing will be this horse's game, but go back to his point form, it's real strong. He gets in here off of his hurdle mark of 125. Now, if this horse isn't a 140s horse, then this must be something clinically abnormal with him these days, but he would be one that would look very well in off of his handicap rating. So again, you can see that I've talked about it. There would be some that are interested. Now, With the Surrey Dock AA JP ownership, Dr. Sanderson's in here as well. Now, maybe Dr. Sanderson will be the one that they decide to go with in here for winning the race. Maybe they'll go with that, so it gives the weight lower down for Surrey Dock AA, or maybe Surrey will go and race somewhere else. But it'll be interesting to see who runs in this. As I've mentioned, there's a couple in there that could interest me. And I'm not talking the short-term anti-post prices. None of that tempts me now. But I can't imagine, even when the market's reformed, you're going to get far off of the positions that they are in the betting. Listed Handicapped Chase wouldn't jump out to me as a race I want to get stuck into, to be honest. Smaller field though, so I'm sure there'll be some people that would be quite happy to get stuck into that. Nice enough Novices hurdle. The 2 mile Novices at Ascot, I do think, can tend to be quite nice races going in there. This Tom Lacey horse, I messed this up before when I tried to pronounce it, but Ling Corrigibla, we'll just say. Really, really impressive bumper winner. We haven't seen it for a while. That looked like it was going to be a proper horse. The gap in between would be a slight niggle, but that would definitely be one for the shortlist. In terms of watching, at least anyway, again, to be respectful to these horses, doesn't look the deepest of races. Linley King in there's again one that's probably interesting. Now, the Sodexo Handicap Hurdle listed race, the feature race of the day is the Gold Cup, but this is normally quite a useful handicap to be watching anyway. Sebastopol that we talked about was again ended up elsewhere. Would be interesting if it ran elsewhere, the same as I think it could potentially be interesting if it came here. Hang in there for Emma Lavelle. Now, was a decent enough novice herder, but then sort of fell apart at Cheltenham and then fell after, and then hasn't been great since. But another horse you'd think would probably be better than the 139. Kid Commando, really good bumper winner. I told you Anthony Honeyball's in good form. 136 for him would be very interesting in this race. Again, we really need to see final declarations for this, but this is a race that's interesting. Balinska as well was a nice point winner. Another one that's probably better than his mark. So that will definitely be one that's going to draw me in. We'll see. Sodexo Gold Cup Handicap Chase. Again, I mentioned about surname when we talk about Weatherby. I really feel like he's going to come here. He'll put a load of horses out the handicap as well, because 10 stone will be the lightest you're allowed to race off in here. Minimum weight is 10 stone. So you look at the amount of horses here under that, 149 or under, and you're going to be out the handicap. So it would ruin a good number of horses' weights in there if he did come, which obviously has to be an advantage to him. Vindication's not going to come here. Black Horton won't. Paul Nicholls isn't going to send both from here. ASO, I think that might even be entered in the Charlie Hall as well. Just looking at the ones that are in here, you'd think surname running in this race, as much as it's a handicap and he'll be carrying a ton of weight, isn't necessarily the worst thing to be doing, given the fact that you'll have so many horses out the handicap. He could end up with probably 2 or 3 genuinely handicapped horses that would be a threat. So I think surname will come to Ascot. Now, in saying all of that, probably you'd be thinking, well, why am I not suggesting backing him? And it is because it is stepping up in trip, and he will be carrying a lot of weight. So there's enough in terms of like potential excuses in there, but it could be interesting, and it is still a bit of a punt, isn't it? So there's not potentially enough juice in the price there for me to think that. In saying that, I'm sort of talking myself in and out of it, but short-term anti-post is difficult. This early in the season, there will be better betting propositions than this. It's a punty one, but yeah, I think surname will come to Ascot. And then bumper, again, Ascot Bumpers, not necessarily like a hard and fast rule, but I do like some of these bumpers. Again, it depends on the depth of the race, but some interesting entries there. Nikki Henderson's got a couple that could be interesting if they ran. So that's Saturday covered. Sunday's pretty pish, to be honest. There's only, I don't even think Cork was up to much, to be fair. We'll have a quick skim through just to reiterate and for completeness. I had a quick skim through these before I started the recording for the Sunday stuff, just to see if I could give myself a bit of a break. So listed novice hurdler, you'd like to think there'd be something of some real ability. Ragnar Lodbrok was disappointing in his bumpers, but won quite nicely. Young Ted as well, stepping up in trip. So again, this is where I'm talking about these novices, the staying ones. So yeah, Young Ted would be interesting in there for sure. Grade 3, Novices Steeplechase. Slightly disappointing to see the lack of decent entrance in there, given it's a 2.5 miler. You think to yourself, easy work could have come here if they needed to get him out, as opposed to pretending the other option. Now, Polished Steel ran his price the last day. I didn't think it should have been as big a price This could be the sort of race for it. It doesn't look the greatest, does it, to be honest? So you'd probably sit back and let that one go. Don't like handicap chases like that. Don't like that handicap hurdle. Bumper. Again, there'll be something in and around it, but not real jumping off the sheet names there. Huntingdon would probably be more interesting than Carlisle as a track for my liking, and it starts off with a claiming hurdle. There we go, Dave. Juvenile. Now, Nikki Henderson does send some nice horses over to Huntingdon, but we'll see what goes. There we go. A Mare's Novices Hurdle, Ballinger's Corner. I don't really know anything about her point form, so we want to look back at, but I wouldn't be getting myself too excited. Panic Attack for David Pipe. Anything that goes from Mullins isn't going to improve, is it? So, not sure. Novices Chase, Coconut Splash. So I mentioned the fact that he had an entry before and he'll be interested over a fence. It sure is again here again. So this is a Novices Chase, not a Novices Handicap Chase for It Sure Is. So again, be interested to see where they go with him first time out. I like him when they're entered like this in an open company as well as running, well, not open, but novice company, as well as outside the as well as in the handicap, should I say? Because if they go for the handicap, I'd suggest that they fancy him off the mark. More handicappings. Lots more handicapping. So yeah, it could be a couple at Huntingdon on the Sunday, depending on final decks, but we'll find those out on Friday, and we'll be looking at the racing Friday, so we can see the final decks. Carlisle, again, Global Fame's entered in there. It looks like that's been entered enough that they're looking for a weak race for Global Flame to go and win, is what I'd read that as, to be honest. That'll be losing its novice status soon, so it'll be carrying a penalty for now, so they probably just want to be getting a win. Novices Handicap Chase, so again, how many times do I need to say it? Coconut Splash is in this as well, so that could be interesting. Remastered, I talked about so much last season. It's never really shown a lot, has it? But Pipe Horse, you never know when that will do anything. So yes, could be interesting to see where Coconut Splash goes this weekend more than anything. Not a lot in the handicap hurdle looking there. Yeah, we go. Colin Parker, Intermediate Chase. So there's me slagging off Sunday's racing, and we had the race that Lost in Translation came out in last year. So, Brewing Up a Storm, Ollie Murphy had already confirmed this was the place where Brewing Up a Storm was going. We've got some nice entries within here. So, Black Op, Brewing Up a Storm, even Ardleith, that ran really well at Chepstow last season. Imperial Law obviously went and won at Cheltenham. Sam Brown, bit old now, but was pretty good as his novice last season. Esprit de Large obviously went and won the Henry VIII Novices Chase at Sandown. I believe it is that one. Yeah, it's a pretty interesting race. Even Marcy Tommy Tucker in there. Windsor Avenue, that's a fairly steady race. So final decks, we need to see that there could be a potential betting opportunity in there. Tricky thing is these middle-ish ones here. So the weights and official ratings of these types of horses is going to bring them much of a muchness. Sometimes you can get something quite well handicapped in there. I know it's not handicap, but on those terms, if you see what I mean. Handicap hurdle, Kid Commander in there again. So yeah, it could be something Sunday as well, to be fair. So there's a few interesting races to be looking at. Bumper, I suspect if some trainers are sending some other nice horses up for the hurdles and chases, they might send some nice types up for the bumper, but not a great deal jumps out at first glance. So yeah, there's a lot of racing coming up this weekend is the long and the short of it. I want to give you guys my early thoughts at entry stage. Now, there'll be horses that won't run, that if you've watched this for long enough, you'll get a feel of the horses that are sort of on my radar, the types of things I'm looking at. When it gets to a Wednesday, so tomorrow night, we'll get Friday's full declarations. I will do a mini video for Friday's final declarations, price points, put that up alongside a bit of a write-up. Maybe I won't do the write-up, maybe I'll just stick you on the videos. I'll do the same Thursday for Saturdays, and then Friday we'll be talking about the racing again, but we'll do it for Sunday. So the next 3 days, there'll be another video coming out for each of the final declarations to tell you the horses that I like, the horses I'm on, and I'll do more detailed reasons about why. So I know you guys don't necessarily want to just hear me talking about stuff other than why I fancy a horse or reasoning behind it. If you do just want the selections, then that will be put up as a flash in those anyway. So trying to get some new stuff out for the season. Lots of people ask me my methods and stuff like that. This would be my first look for the weekend to give myself a short list of horses and races to be looking at. So let me know if you've got any feedback on this, any comments, all that sort of stuff. I'll read through all of them and reply to as many as are appropriate. And yeah, see you on the other side.